Jetpack Joyride is almost 12 years old, and while in this day and age the game is all but dead, years ago pretty much everyone and their mother was playing this game or had heard of it at the very least. The game was addicting because it was an infinite auto-scrolling game that constantly pushed players to beat their own high score, and it gave them a variety of unique and fun gadgets and vehicles to do just that. I'm sure many players probably ask themselves the simple question, how far could I possibly go? And although this was the case, it's likely that the average player never reached much further than 10,000 meters. But some people, including myself, simply never stopped asking this question. This is the story of how I went from a casual Jetpack Joyride player to beating the world record by complete accident just 2 years later. Enjoy. Just like most people, I began playing Jetpack Joyride shortly after it released back in 2011. I was pretty casual at the time and obviously didn't take it very seriously, and I just tried to have fun with it. I would go in, switch out my gadgets, jetpacks, and costumes to try to keep the experience as fresh as possible, as well as try to beat my high score from time to time, which I believe never exceeded 6,000 meters. It's also important to remember at this point in time, the game was pretty bare bones, not having a lot of the vehicles that have been added since, such as the strong arm machine that you see on the screen now, as well as not having any of the fun but admittedly OP power-ups that we have access to today. I had fun with the game for a few years, playing it on and off, but eventually it began to slip my mind and I forgot about it entirely. But that is until the winter of 2020, when I came back and decided to reinstall the game. After reinstalling the game, I took some time to familiarize myself with the newest addition, being the power-ups, which granted the player a variety of abilities ranging from a coin trail, a boost, a shield, or even a free vehicle. These power-ups actually had tiers and could be upgraded using coins, but the further you progress to the upgrades, the more expensive they would get, encouraging players to grind even more. Along with that, for about the first month or so, I was competing with a friend of mine, and we were constantly trying to one-up each other and beat each other's high score. Leading to the first game that I remember vividly blowing my mind, which I unfortunately don't have footage of, but I reached just over 12,000 meters if I remember correctly. As happy as I was with this game at the time, I felt as though I could be doing more. Typically, I would stick pretty strictly to Flash and Freeride as my gadgets, purely because I thought they were fun to use. But I would experiment a little bit and switch these to the Gravity Belt and Air Berries. The Air Berries allowing the player to jump more quickly off the floor, and the Gravity Belt making the player fall to the ground much faster. With this high mobility approach, I figured it'd be much easier to dodge zappers, especially because they become really close together after around 8,000 meters. Within the first couple weeks following this change, I would see my high score shoot up quite a bit, leading to the final two personal bests that I unfortunately don't have footage of, with the first one being a 27,000 meter run, and the second one being a 35,000 meter run. Shortly after reaching 35,000 meters, I decided to set myself a very ambitious goal, and that was to reach 100,000 meters, and then after that, I would probably quit the game. One of the factors in this decision is that I had learned a lot about the game after reaching 35,000 meters. For one thing, after reaching 10,000 meters, the game really doesn't get any harder, meaning it was just as much a test of endurance as it was skill. After 10,000 meters, the scroll rate on the screen maxes out, and the zappers cannot become clumped any closer together, meaning that the game is the exact same difficulty if you were at, say, 200,000 meters. The only downside is that the game sometimes will spawn literally impossible situations to escape from, meaning that the final factor in getting far was just downright luck. Shortly after setting this new goal, I would finally achieve a new best, and this time I had a screenshot to prove it, and this was a 52,000 meter run, being just over the halfway point to 100,000 meters. Up until this point, my progression had actually been going fairly smoothly, but after reaching 52,000 meters, it would begin to slow down and I had some trouble getting a new best. At this point, I had to try to optimize my runs as much as possible, and most of my games would actually end before 10,000 meters because I would down a few times and ultimately decide that the game just wasn't worth playing out because I knew I would run out of revives before I reached my best. And just to clarify, for those of you that don't know, If you see on my screen at any point that I have hundreds of revives in this video, just know that the game won't allow you to actually use all of those within one run, and this usually caps at about 10, I'm not sure, I've never counted the exact amount, plus whatever revives you might get from the final spin. I learned all of this the hard way by choking a 49,000 meter run and a new best, but eventually, with enough restarts for a good beginning, I would pull through with a new best of just over 63,000 meters. This run wasn't particularly memorable, but the one thing it did do was teach me the importance of the strong arm machine, which I'll just be calling the SAM from now on. The SAM was introduced a few years after the game initially launched, and it differed from the other vehicles in the sense that it took up to 3 hits to destroy it, and it had the player dodging only missiles. I found using the SAM to be way easier than dodging zappers as Barry or in any other vehicle, so I decided that to optimize my runs as much as I could at this point in time, I would try to spend as much time in the SAM as possible. The first way I did this was to try to get a good game going and at the same time have 2 SAMs in the same run. The way you could do this was first get the daily SAM from collecting the puzzle pieces, which are set once every 24 hours, and then later on using the free SAM that you can obtain by watching an ad after you down. I would wait as long as I could in the game to collect the 3rd puzzle piece to enter the SAM, that way I wouldn't be skipping the easy part of the game, and later on if I took it down and felt I needed a break, I could jump into the free SAM. And lastly, it took a lot of practice. And after a while, I was eventually able to get quite good in the SAM, and as a result, my high score started to climb. My next high score would be a little over 74,000 meters. I honestly don't remember a whole lot from this game, other than the fact that I didn't have a great start, but I clutched up and played pretty well after 50,000 meters. Moving on. My next new best after this was just over 86,000 meters, and there's not much to say about this one, other than I played slightly better than the last game, and this would actually end up being my last game for a long time. After a couple months of inactivity, I would eventually return to the game. And on my very first attempt back, I was nearly able to beat my personal best by falling just a couple thousand meters short. And in the coming weeks, I would have a few more games and somewhere in the 70,000 meter range. I'm not exactly sure where, I don't have screenshots of them. But I remember at this point starting to get a little bit frustrated, and I was actually starting to doubt whether I could reach 100,000 meters after all. Because I thought I had just sort of plateaued at this point. But after a bit of thinking, I did think of a few things that I could improve upon. The first one being that I could do a better job of manipulating the zappers and missiles to where I wanted them to go. If you stay in one part of the screen for too long, the game will tend to clump up a bunch of zappers in that area and send missiles your way. So to combat this, I started to waver more across the screen and hover from top to bottom and go back and forth to try to prevent those situations where you just get boxed in by zappers or missiles. The other thing I did was try to get my first second chance out of the final spin as early as possible, usually after my first or second down. Contrary to what a lot of people think, you actually can get more than 1 second chance out of the final spin. It's just really rare. Usually if you play a long enough game and collect a fair amount of spin tokens, you will get lucky enough to get a second one. But in a few cases in extremely long games that I have played, I have actually gotten lucky enough to get a third second chance out of the final spin. This is incredibly rare. It's only happened to me 2 or 3 times. Basically, if you space out your second chances and use your first one as early as possible, it will maximize your odds of getting another one down the road. Equipped with new optimizations and a higher skill level than I had ever had due to loads of practice, I would eventually start up a new game. But little did I know, this game would change everything. All the doubts I had in the past would be put to rest, because on December 31st, 2021, I would blow past the 100,000 meter barrier, reaching a final distance of 116,444 meters, putting an end to a battle that had lasted over a year and a half. Now don't get me wrong, I was extremely happy that I had finally reached my goal, but I couldn't quit the game just yet. One thing about me is that I'm never quite satisfied, and I knew deep down that this game was far from perfect. So after taking a bit of a break, I would ultimately come back and try to beat my high score just like all the times in the past. In the months following my first 100,000 meter run, I wouldn't be nearly as active in the game as I had been in the past. but I still did manage to get a few really good games, and I actually reached 100,000 meters 3 more times, but in none of these games could I beat my original best of 116,000 meters. Out of these 3 games, the best run I would get would be a 110,000 meter run. After falling just short of my personal best for the 3rd time, I started to wonder if this was it for me. I vaguely remember a friend of mine asking if I thought I could beat the world record, which sat at 235,000 meters at the time, to which I replied, "There's no way." I figured at most, with the absolute perfect game, I could maybe reach 150,000 meters, but the world record was completely out of the picture. And I began to realize, at least for me, that in an infinite scrolling game, true perfection cannot really be achieved. Within the next 7 months, I would barely touch the game, being demotivated by my previous failures. But on October 14th, 2022, I would start up a quick and casual game on a long car ride. What I didn't know is that this would be the game to shatter all of my expectations, and it would be more than double the length of any game that I had ever played before. This game would start just like any other. I would smash through the wall, fly a few hundred meters, pick up a couple vehicles, get a shield fairly early on, start working on the puzzle pieces for the daily SAM, and making sure that I avoided grabbing the last one as long as possible. Eventually, I would reach 50,000 meters, and I only had 1 down up until that point. This was by far the best start I had ever had to a game, but I wasn't trying to get my hopes up because I knew after so much time playing the game how quickly a run could go down the toilet. This is because one of the hardest parts of the game, at least in my opinion, is recovering after a down. Getting back up without a shield and trying to adjust to the rapidly increasing scroll rate of the screen is not easy. But knowing this game at least had a lot of potential, I kept playing. I continued to play for a while, and eventually I would reach 100,000 meters for only the 5th time ever, and I got here with only 3 downs. At this point, I had to stop and think about my pacing. What I mean by this is that often in a lot of these long games, I would stop and think about the amount of quick revives I had used versus how many I had left to try and determine how far I could actually get within that run. And since I had only used 3 so far and had roughly 9 or 10 left if I factored in what I would get out of the final spin, I realized that I wasn't just on pace to beat my personal best. I was on pace to beat the world record. I knew the game could still quickly go down the drain from here, so I focused up and played on because I knew that this game was something special. About 10 minutes later, I would finally beat my personal best of 116,000 meters, and I still had a lot of revives left. So I set my sights on reaching 150,000 meters. I didn't want to make my goal too much higher than this to start with because I knew that it would probably just make me disappointed if I didn't reach it, even though I still had a really good game. I did run into a bit of turbulence after reaching 140,000 meters, downing 3 times before I reached 150,000, but I eventually reached that without much of an issue, and I still had a lot of revives left. At this point, I was wondering if 200,000 was actually possible. The only way I would be able to find out was to just keep playing. After downing a few more times, I eventually found myself at 190,000 meters. At this point, I had a few revives left and was pretty confident that I would reach 200,000, and I was very excited. But at the same time, I was also very nervous, because if you remember what I said earlier, the world record as far as I knew was 235,000 meters. If I kept playing this good, I did have a chance to beat it, but if I took a few downs, since I only had a few quick revives left, that could very easily disappear right before my eyes. About 20 minutes later, I would reach 230,000 meters, only a couple minutes away from breaking the world record, and I was extremely nervous. From what I remember, I only had, I think, 2 quick revives left, meaning that the game could still end very quickly, causing me to choke. I knew that I had played fantastic this game, the best I ever had, and I had also gotten absurdly lucky. So lucky that I realized that this game could be once in a lifetime. I knew that if I choked, I may never get the opportunity to get this far ever again. This had to be the game. A few very stressful minutes came and went, but I could eventually breathe a sigh of relief as I finally did what I once thought was impossible. I reached 236,000 meters, officially a new world record. But because I only had 2 quick revives left and I knew the game would be over soon, I decided to keep playing to see just how far I could push the record. And I did just that, because about 20 minutes later I would finally die at 272,670 meters, a near perfect game and a new world record. What if I told you I lied about breaking the world record? Would you believe me? Well, you probably should, because as it turns out, I did lie. But understand, I only did this just to put you in my perspective at the time. You see, when I finished this game, I truly did believe that it was the world record. Because the in-game leaderboard is all but broken and inaccessible to most players, the only way I knew of to view the actual world record was to do a quick YouTube search, and I did just that. It had been months since I had done this, but the last time I checked, the record sat at 235,000 meters. So after typing in Jetpack Joyride world record this time and scrolling for only a few seconds, I would quickly be put into my place when I came across this. Yes, you're seeing that right. Titan YT Gaming reached 517,000 meters. Shortly after watching a bit of Titan's video, I would come to learn that there actually was a Discord server that was dedicated to maintaining a list of the top 10 highest verified scores ever achieved, and Titan did indeed sit firmly at the number 1 spot. However, I was a little impressed to learn that my game still sat at the number 3 spot, despite being absolutely crushed by Titan. And no, as you can see, my name is not actually on this leaderboard. I never submitted my game because I didn't have the full gameplay, mostly because I wasn't expecting to ever get that far, and I didn't want 3 hours of footage on my phone. The only piece of video proof I actually have that the list would accept is the background footage that you've been seeing through a lot of this video. This leads me to believe that there are plenty of other people who have had insane runs over the years, but I've just never had their names show up on the leaderboard because they didn't submit their game. A recent example I can think of this is a player named Cypress, who just a few months before my game reached 267,000 meters. If this is the case, then my game could be far from the top, and there could be several players that have passed this point before. So all this being said, what's the furthest I could possibly reach? If you remember me saying before, this game was nearly perfect, though it still had its issues. I downed 3 times between 140 and 150,000 meters. If these downs had been more spread out and efficient, I could have reached 300,000. Additionally, I had 2 SAM runs, but they weren't great. However, if they would have been both my 2 best runs ever, which is just over 30,000, that could have added another potentially 30 to 40,000 meters to this run, meaning my hypothetical max for this game would have been anywhere from 350 to 360,000 meters at the most. The other way to look at this is purely theoretical. The reason I was able to make the jump from 116 to 272,000 meters was because first, I played extremely consistently over the entire 3-hour duration of this game. Also, nearly all of my lives were used efficiently, and I made it quite far with each one. I was able to make clean recoveries, with the only hiccup being between 140 and 150,000 meters. I was also able to implement the zapper manipulation strategy that I talked about earlier extremely well this game. This allowed me to minimize the amount of hits I was taking on my shield and make them last a long time. Where the element of luck comes into play was that almost every single time I actually ran out of my shield, I got a new one back almost immediately. Obviously, playing without a shield is extremely dangerous, and one silly mistake can lead to a down. All this means that one of the biggest things that allows players to get further than they can ever imagine is luck. There becomes a certain point where you can't really become any more skilled, consistent, or implement any more optimizations to improve your odds of getting far. The one thing you can always have more of is luck. Even the best players will down, take hits on their shield, make silly mistakes, or struggle to recover, but as long as you're getting shields and other power-ups to help you out along your way, the sky truly is the limit. And just know that me talking about luck is not trying to discredit Titan's game. He truly is an insane player, and he's managed to reach 350,000 meters multiple times. All of this being said, I theoretically could beat Titan's record, but realistically, I don't think I ever could. Hell, I don't think I'll ever have the skill, motivation, or luck to beat even my own personal best just one more time. After 3 years of grinding this game, I can comfortably say that I am finally satisfied. Thanks for watching.